All right, we should probably get started. 10 o'clock. Today, topic classical era, part two. Remember, big C classical is a time period. Small c classical refers to classical music, music written in the classical tradition. So, the Viennese school. Has anyone ever been to Vienna? It's supposed to be beautiful. It's supposed to be one of the best qualities of life in the world, I've always heard. Quick word, the value of the quizzes. The quizzes are each 7 points. There will be 11 of them. I have it planned out. Again, if you check the revised syllabus, I plan out when they happen. But real quickly, again, there were 17 classes that were online. We had 30 points allocated for attendance. 13 classes happened. So 17 of those points plus the 2 quizzes we're missing is 77 points. So the way I distribute them is putting, the 11 7-point quizzes. The average, these are great. Do them, please. The average so far on them has been in the mid B range, 83 to 86% on all of them. So you guys are doing great. Those of you that have done them. So please, there's no due date. That's not fair to assign due dates on them because you guys didn't sign up for an online class. And I have received a couple emails of people saying, sorry, I just don't have good internet. Totally get it. Again, you signed up for a real class. So anyway, that said, so going back in time, Vienna was the musician city. And today's standards, like I've said, Vienna still is supposed to be one of the best cities in which to live. And I don't know if there's what's so special about it. There's a picture of it I have in the background here. Something in the water in Vienna, as people say, to make it so significant. But these 3 guys are what we're going to spend time on. I know they're all dead white men, but that's unfortunately where a lot of this came from. There's a lot of research being done, just to tie this in, also into your midterm. That was due last month. There's a lot of research being done on non-white male composers. And someone just did a free online piece about Florence Price. And a lot of you covered her for your midterm. And I thought that was really interesting because, she's just coming out of the woodwork. She was a very successful composer, more modern. Actually, what were her years? Florence Price was 1887 to 1953. Okay, so she lived, 100 years before me, roughly. But still, born 100 years, or a little less than 100 years. So that's kind of interesting. There's another composer I got to look up, but he was one of the first black composers in Europe, and he was from the 1500s. And it's we forget about covering these people. So it's not like why are these 3 guys the ones we talk about is what's going to be important. And we're going to discuss them in depth today. Well, a little bit of depth. It's not a major class. You don't have to know everything about these people. All right. So the Viennese school, if there's a question, who's in the Viennese school? The original Viennese school? Joseph Haydn, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and Ludwig van Beethoven. Actually, Joseph's the most normal name here. Mozart's name is really, I think this is kind of funny. His real name, is Johannes Chrysostomus Wolfgangus Theophilus Mozart. And apparently they called him Amadeus because that meant gift from God or something. It translates to something, and it's a movie. Well, let's just a little snippet of it. So anyway, getting into this. Haydn, look where he lived. He was early on in the classical era. He outlived Mozart, which we'll see, and they were friends. He was one of the most prolific and prominent, meaning he wrote a lot of music. And if you're studying classical music, a lot of people are studying Haydn's music here. Now, see this picture of this? I forgot I can do this. This is where the guy worked. This is the Esterhazy mansion, if you will. That was his job, was to write music for the Esterhazy family. So he had a gig. He had a working gig as a composer. Also, he was one of the first that made a career out of it and went on tour and toured Europe and played his music throughout the world. I remember the U.S. was not... Well, it was a thing when he was older, right? Yeah, he was in his 40s when when the U.S. became a thing. So they call him the father of the symphony and the father of the string quartet. These 2 genres happened under his guidance. He helped develop what the symphony and the string quartet are. And they've been changed over the years, definitely, but he wrote some of the most significant symphonies and string quartets. There are other people that wrote these pieces, but he's pretty much in charge, was pretty much in charge of what it sounds like, and the structure. Okay? He was a friend of Mozart and a student of Beethoven. He was supposed to be apparently really funny. There's a lot of jokes in his pieces, which we'll look at in a second. Apparently, like, he would like cut people's hair. He would like be in choir and cut kids' hair, like cut the other guys' hairs, and he was just really silly. And he was a very likable person. This isn't said about most musicians in general. A lot of them could be, great musicians, but not likable people. Some of them can be very controversial. We know this by today's pop stars, and they say things that are just outlandish, and people are coming to mind for most of you, I bet. Right? So Haydn was just a very likable person. And again, this thing keeps popping up. I'm not updating. Okay. Some of his music. First, we're going to listen to Symphony number 94. Just check that out. In 1791, that was the year Mozart died. Haydn already was on his Symphony number 94. He apparently wrote 106 symphonies. I don't know how many symphonies you guys have written. Use guys, must be New Jersey, have written, but it's a lot of work. So he would churn out these symphonies. And last time we talked about why this is easy, because of form. Because the form and the structure was pretty much already set. And he was just like putting in notes. So if you guys understand that process, okay, you have the form and you just start sprinkling in the notes. This is the second movement. So of the 94th Symphony. So by his standard, this should be a slow and lyrical movement. But he calls it the Surprise Symphony for a reason. I don't know when that name was applied to this. A lot of times back in the day, we've mentioned before, the music was not about individual expression. This music was about balance and form and order. I'm writing my 94th Symphony now. This is my job, to write the symphony. However, some of them have emotional titles in here. So this one, they were called the Surprise Symphony for a reason. So let's listen to how nice and quiet this is and try to figure out what the surprise is. So, what was the surprise? It's the frustrating thing of not having a real class. Almost every semester when I play this, on those speakers out there in University Hall, everyone jumps at that moment. So, second movement is supposed to be slow and lyrical and calm. And it starts that way, right? Everyone's focused. Oh, listen to this little tune. This, right? Really simple. Right? Then all of a sudden, bam, it gets loud and surprised. There's other surprises throughout the symphony. But this is a spot that most people know because it wakes you up. Because it's a slow thing, and everyone's expecting this. Again, people were educated in the music they went to go see. So they saw, okay, we had our first movement, was fast and lively. The second movement's going to be a little break, a little quieter, and then bam, he hits you with this loud sound. And that was a nice way of being funny, right? Another one. This one has an interesting story. This one, several symphonies earlier. The Farewell Symphony. The story behind this one, he was writing they were in the summer, like a summer camp, if you will, for Esterházy. And they were at the summer palace, and the musicians were performing pieces that Haydn was writing, and they were getting tired. The orchestra, they really wanted to go home and visit their wives. They're all men that performed. Women rarely played music and professionally back then. Now it's getting closer to 50-50, but it's still not. So he wanted to give a hint in the music that the prince should send people home. And they were done. They wanted to go home and see their family. They wanted to make the trip back to Eisenstadt. So in this piece, as the performers, instead of everyone ending together, as the performer had finished their part, they left the stage. And they turned this into like a theatrical kind of piece. So here's a performance of it. I'm going to start about halfway through because the beginning's kind of like a normal piece. And rarely does this happen when someone is done and they leave, right? They wait until the end of the piece. Usually, a way to end a symphony is loud and big. Everyone playing together, like this big hit. Oh, ta-da! Everyone hit the last note. We're done. The audience takes the cue to stand up and clap. Then the orchestra leaves. However, Haydn was doing something different with this. He was trying to be funny and also to send a message. All right. So you hear, well, first off, it's a funny idea, right? It's a new idea to let people leave and to send a message. So it had a point to doing this. It wasn't just trying to be funny. But what did this do musically? Instead of having this loud, triumphant finish to the piece, it dwindled away. And he did this by making the orchestra smaller, literally. Like people left the stage, right? They're leaving the stage. We no longer hear that part. So the piece is getting smaller and smaller. And like I wrote in the chat, like think of how they have to act in a way. You have to be an actor. You have to be funny, and you can't just get up and go. They were just, one guy had a wine glass and salutes him. You know, they're like tapping each other on the shoulder. So they're being funny about it, making this more of a theatrical piece. In a way, this foreshadows some stuff we see today, which could be very theatrical. So this is just a way to show how people did play around with form a little bit, and people were experimenting a little bit in the classical age, while most things were very, very standard and very, very strict. Okay. So one of the most interesting composers to talk about, I'm sure everyone's heard of Mozart, one of the most prolific and interesting composers of all time. And people know him as being the child prodigy, someone that performed at apparently 5 years old. There's some research saying that this was a lie. He was actually older, but it doesn't matter. The point is he wrote a lot of music. Look how old. He was 35 when he died. And he wrote about 626 published pieces. So 40-something symphonies, and then he wrote operas and songs and all this other string quartets, everything. He wrote almost in every genre. So he did a lot of work, you know. And he wasn't just like a one-hit wonder, like I mentioned. He was, everything he did was successful. Almost everything he did was successful. And just one after the other, these hit after hit after hit, every time he wrote a piece of music. And he was just this very, very interesting figure in that way. What I think was really interesting is he died while writing a requiem, a funeral mass. So he was commissioned to write a piece for the dead, you know, that we played at a funeral mass, and then he dies during it. And that's kind of a prophetic in a way. But and Haydn was his friend. Like I said, you know, Haydn was a little bit older and actually lived longer, so he knew Mozart his whole life. For Mozart's whole life. And he said he wrote that, you know, posterity will not see such a talent again in 100 years. And I mean, I don't know if you guys have things in your head about like who's the Mozart of today. And there have been other child prodigies. A lot of the composers we look at were just amazing at the time. I mentioned before I have a private student. It's amazing working with this kid. He's like 13 and he's written all these symphonies and so much work. He wins contests. He can play any instrument. He picks up an instrument and learns it so quickly. And we don't know what to do with him. He doesn't go to Montclair. He goes to he's 13, like I said, and he takes lessons with me at another school. And it's just like the teachers and I are like, what do we do with this kid? So things like that happen. And I don't know if anyone knows Jacob Collier. He's like he's probably in his mid 20s right now. And sometimes I'll say his name and people get so excited because he's 25. This guy is, you know, just amazing in what he can do. So I know some people that are just, because they're brought up with it. I mean, there is talent, there is luck involved and how he picks up on things, but it could be because his dad was a musician and he grew up around music and that might have something to do with it. But we should know, there's a lot of things we should know about music, about Mozart. Things we know about him is he apparently was very childlike, very awkward. And we'll look at his toilet humor in a second too. But this movie Amadeus is not supposed to be a factual recount of his life. But if any of you have seen this movie, it's a great movie, it won awards and everything. Some people have a problem with it because it's not historically accurate. But again, that's not the point. A movie is a movie and it's entertaining to watch. And there's different cuts of it. The original cut I would see was a lot shorter, obviously. Then a friend lent me a DVD of it and it's years ago, and it's like much longer. There's a nude scene in it, and it's like really like pushing. You know, it's a little bit more. It's darker, but basically, here's a little scene that's going to show how Mozart apparently could go somewhere, go to a concert, hear a piece, and memorize how to play it immediately. He'll listen to it. He apparently can go to a concert, come home, and then write it down, or he could be at a concert and say, "Oh, is this what you did?" and just go up to the piano and play it. All right, so check this out. This is Mozart, and the other man in the movie, other main character is supposed to be Antonio Salieri. In the movie, they're enemies. I mean, Salieri is jealous of Mozart. There's one clip, he's like, "From now on, we are enemies, you and I." And there's a metal band that quoted that for their album. It was always so cool. But it's like this, so it's pretty dark. In real life, they were friends. Apparently, they were friends. So the movie kind of spins it up, but I think Salieri did have this jealousy of Mozart. So Mozart's this guy you see in this picture here, the high voice and the funny laugh. The Emperor. Salieri wrote this piece for the Emperor. The Emperor is playing. He's like, "Oh, thank you. This is." I mean, you hear what Salieri said first. He looks at the cross as "Grazie, Signore," meaning like thanks to the Lord for the gift of music. So, and the Emperor is playing it. Oh, what a great piece! But Mozart walks in and starts messing with it. He's like, "Ha ha, ha, Salieri, look what I can do." And that's just like a dick move, right? That's like not something you do. Usually you have to respect some other people's music. But, and think about how Salieri feels, like that he spent all this time on this piece for the Emperor. Then Mozart comes in and starts playing it and starts elaborating on it, embellishing it a little bit. And he's like taking his work and trying to one-up him a little bit. So I don't know how true that is, how he acted, but the point of this is apparently his memory was amazing. Some people today try to label him as autistic or something on the spectrum, which is, I think, very damaging and not appropriate. But, oh, well, he had this disorder. Well, no, he was a genius. He was able to accomplish so much. What does it matter? And today we label people too much with those disabilities. But I think that's the way he was. So apparently he was very childish. You know, that silly laugh he had. And that goes throughout the whole movie. If you watch the movie, he's really silly the whole time and like saying some strange things. They don't put a lot of toilet humor in the movie. So here's something that I want to discuss. I don't know if anyone speaks German. Leck mich im Arsch. It means pretty much, it means lick my ass. So that's pretty nice. Apparently this is, we'll first talk about, his toilet humor in general. Then we'll listen to the piece called that. His publisher made him change it. Lass uns froh sein. Let us be glad. So this is new. This is proof that like shocking music and music with, dirty subject matter and everything, in this case, actual literal like toilet humor, is nothing new. All right. So sorry for the cursing, but this is very appropriate. So check this out. So that's a little bit of Mozart for you that probably didn't know. You think of this as all prim and proper, but no, he had this idea of toilet humor. If you want to hear the piece, the Leck mich im Arsch, here's what it sounded like. This was a fun piece for him and his friends to perform. Again, like that lady said in the last video, this wasn't serious music, but it shows that people have a sense of humor and makes them a little bit more live, right? Rather than this like kind of esoteric figure out there. So here's a little bit of the funny song. And listen to the imitation. Listen how it's composed really well, actually. This is working. It's a funny little tune, right? It's a catchy tune. It's simple. It's easy to listen to, but he's talking about gross stuff. And if you don't speak German, obviously it doesn't mean anything, but when they translate it to English, it's horrible. It doesn't really make any sense. But in German, like that lady said, it rhymes. So there's some Mozart for you. Now let's get something a little more serious. His Requiem, last piece he ever wrote, was completed by his student. Again, if you watch the movie Amadeus, they show Salieri finishing it for him. Mozart's on his deathbed, and he's like telling him what notes to play, what notes to write. And that didn't happen. It was apparently his student, his copyist, someone that worked for him, helped finish the piece. The story about Mozart, he was buried in a commoner's mass grave. Yeah, I heard recently they found his grave, and they went out and they found his tombstone, and they dug him up. They said, "Oh, it's Mozart." And you know what he's doing now? Decomposing. All right, so that's not true. So here's a little bit of his Requiem in D minor. All right, so listen how intense this is and how it sounds almost Baroque in some of its layering, and there's lots of polyphony, and it doesn't have that catchy kind of classical sound compared to a lot of the Mozart we listened to on Monday. Right? I don't know how I forgot if this is queued up. There's a lot of it I want to show you, but yeah, I'll fast forward to the next part. Or we'll listen to the beginning first, and I'll fast forward to some of the other parts. Hear how intense this is, and how it's not very classical. And we talked about classical being very strict form, balance, and order, and everything being clear. This is a lot of layers, but there's so many motives being brought back and forth between the different voices that you can hear some cohesion here. But it's dark, right? It's really dark, really evil sounding, and it's a mass for the dead. And the text comes from a Latin mass. It's all in Latin, so I have no idea what they're saying. But the point is, he was writing this as he was dying, and to me, that I don't think you can get any more morbid than this. So, things you should know about Mozart: very, very prolific, wrote a lot of music and lots of singles, like hit singles, if you will. People loved his music. And he was, a child prodigy, did a lot as a kid. But toilet humor, right? He was into, very strange humor and very, dirty of a person. But at the same time, and apparently, too, we don't know how he died. Some people think it was alcohol poisoning or just being drunk all the time. We don't know if that's true. And also, apparently, he was very bad with money. He would be paid he hated teaching. So he would be paid to write a piece, but that doesn't pay, he can't live on that. And he would just let the money fall through his fingers. So check out the movie Amadeus to get a little bit of the background, but it's interesting looking at his life. And the sad thing too is he has no descendants. He had 6 kids. I think 4 died as infants, and the other 2 died young, also like in their 20s. So there's no Mozart Jr. out there, and to carry on this legacy, which is sad. So he just is part in time is really important to our culture. A lot of the music we have today is based on what Mozart has done. So check out some of his pieces. That Requiem is just amazing, the whole thing. It's not an opera. I remember I first heard it, I'm like, oh, it's opera. And I'm like, no, it's not opera. It's a Requiem. That's the genre of that. Okay? So the other guy we should talk about is Beethoven, Ludwig van Beethoven. Again, a little bit later in time, right? So I did them in chronological order, 1736, 1750, or whatever, 32, whatever Haydn was, 56, 1770. So the death of Beethoven kind of ended the classical era. Some argue that the classical era ended when Beethoven was still alive, because he would put a lot more emotion into his music. And started the Romantic era, the idea of emotion in music, rather than just, going by the books. That said, I don't think any of you think this music doesn't sound emotional. Maybe some people do. But I think there's emotion in all the music we've heard so far. It's just, it's not the same way as like, a lot of today's music with lots of emotion. But there's emotion behind the composition. So the thing with Beethoven is he had more individuality in his compositions. Individual expression, like I've said before, is not something that happened in the classical era. That was more of a Romantic idea. It was more about just see who can do it better. How can you do the same thing better than someone else? He only wrote 9 symphonies. Compare that to the 41 of Mozart, 106 of Haydn. So I had a teacher once say, well, Haydn wrote 106, but Beethoven wrote 9 good ones. That's not true. Haydn wrote many great pieces too. But people think, quality over quantity. Beethoven obviously spent more time on the symphonies, and they're bigger. They're for bigger orchestras. So that's the thing that's important to know. And before we listen, actually, right now, let's listen to one of his most popular pieces. If you've never heard this, I would be shocked. It's called Bagatelle Number 25 in A minor. Yeah. So you hear this piece, how it's a bagatelle, called Bagatelle Number 25 in A minor, known as for release. Yeah, you guys are saying your favorite, you like it, right? It's soothing and emotional, right? Isn't that emotional? Like, how can you say there's no emotion in this? So that piece has this flow to it, right? This soothing sound to it, because there's more expression, because it's played on a piano. That has a lot to do with it. And this is going to tie in what we talk about with the assignment later on. The idea of this new instrument called the piano allowed you to express yourself in the music better, rather than just everything the same volume. Hold on, this one's not off. But if I went like, doesn't sound the same as whatever the next notes are. It should be soothing, right? Emotional. Why does it work? Because the form is really memorable too, right? We had that one little idea, a little contrast. Then later on, it felt like it got faster. It was the same tempo. The performer kind of pushed it a little bit, but there were more notes and it got more complicated. But that simplicity, people love simplicity. And that little ditty in the beginning. Now, to surprise everyone, this piece goes out of key. It says it's in the key of A minor. Why is it cool? Because it goes out of key. If you see on my hand, I'm using a black key. And it's not supposed to use black keys in A minor. That's the point. That's why it's good. Because it breaks the rules. So, Beethoven, very memorable, lots of memorable melodies. The thing that's super important you should know about Beethoven is he went deaf. He wasn't born deaf. He was around age 26. His hearing started to go, and apparently the last decade of his life, he was almost completely deaf. Some other research has shown it was only one ear, and he could actually hear out of one ear. I don't know if that's really true. But he gave up conducting and performing, and but he still continued to compose. Some interesting things about him being deaf, though. Apparently, how do you say it? Is it tinnitus or tinnitus? I've heard both. Tinnitus, whatever. The ringing in your ears. When you go to a concert and you leave and you just have that horrible ringing in your ears? Apparently, he had that all the time. Some people say it has to do with his cheekbones, and his cheekbones were growing into his ears. I've heard so many different stories about him. I don't really know what's true. Just to put this on an aside, there's research showing that Beethoven was actually black. I don't know if this is how true this is and how much research has been done, but there's a conspiracy apparently that he was whitewashed and just to be more accepted in society, but he actually had Moorish ancestors, like from the northern Africa into the Middle Eastern, the Arabian Peninsula. I don't know. People are doing research about him. People are always discovering things about these people. Like there's new Mozart pieces still being discovered. Like it was recently, a couple of years ago. And then there were people, on the side note, that have programmed computers to make pieces sound like Mozart and trick people and say, oh, this sounds like Mozart. And, oh, we found a new Mozart symphony. I don't know if they've done that with Beethoven. But anyway, people don't know why he went deaf. And people just go deaf. It happens, right? I'm sure some of you have grandparents that, have trouble hearing. And it happens. But as a composer, and at a young age, it's not really great. So I contemplated suicide, but instead took fate by the throat. And we talked about this early in the semester, his Fifth Symphony, that, right, I played it right. I'm in the wrong key, but it doesn't matter. That piece is supposed to be fate knocking on his door. Right? That's supposed to be fate knocking on his door and saying, oh, I'm going to take fate by the throat. I'm not going to kill myself. I'm not going to let this deafness get in the way. You guys might have heard of stories of him like sawing off the legs of his piano and putting the piano on the floor and then lying on the floor to feel the music go through the floor into his body. And you guys all know how we feel music, right? You hear something with big bass frequencies and you feel them. We don't actually pick them up by our ear. It's just, that's the kind of feeling. So apparently, the Ninth Symphony, he never heard. Apparently, he was completely deaf when he wrote his Ninth Symphony. And a little tidbit. Apparently, a CD, those little circle things that play music that are totally out of style. The reason why the size they are is so they can fit Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which is about 74 minutes long, roughly. Of course, it can be different speeds depending on the conductor. But apparently, the CD was originally the size of a record, like a vinyl record, and would hold hours of music, but that was just awkward to put it into a car. So that's why CDs were made small, but they were made big enough to hold Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Because some people say it's the best piece of music ever written. And there's no way to really classify that. I have other opinions, but I do think obviously this is a great piece. So apparently what he did too is he kept like analog text messages. He kept this little book with him. And his friends would write him notes. And that's how he communicated with people. Like you wrote him a note and then he'd answer it in words. So you texted him by writing and you handed it to him in his little book. So kind of sad. And think about how much he was able to do without being able to hear it. So other things to note, if you see this here, his handwriting was atrocious. I can't read this. Mozart apparently had beautiful, clean handwriting, and he never made copies of his work, and his work was apparently like he never redid it. It was like first take and was done, apparently. This is the cover sheet. You see this right here? Apparently, this is from the symphony, the Third Symphony, and he dedicated it to Napoleon Bonaparte, but then he scratched out his name when he declared himself emperor of France. And he's like, oh, I don't like Napoleon anymore, and ripped it out of the score. So I don't know if that's an urban legend or I like to believe things. Things that he did that were different that I want you to listen for when we listen to part of his Ninth Symphony. He would do these long crescendos, these long, powerful, emotional swells of volume getting louder and louder. And the themes, you probably heard this in the Fifth Symphony that we listened to a few weeks ago, playing the same tune, but loud and soft. And it sounded like a different piece of music. That's a genius trait. He experimented with form. We talked about how form in the classical age is usually very standard. Beethoven would mess it up and play around with it a little bit. And then key changes. He didn't follow the idea of, oh, I'm in C, then I go to G, and then back to C. No, he would just play around with key a little bit and experiment, just like we looked at with For Release. The idea of, okay, it's in A minor, but he would hit notes that were out of key on purpose. And what he brought to the musical world is the balance of forcefulness and strength versus emotional. So you had the strong parts balanced with emotion, which I hear in Mozart a little bit, but Beethoven was a little bit stronger with that. And then he would have lyricism and gentleness in his music. And things were bigger. His pieces were bigger. They were longer. He used more instruments. The contrabassoon, which the contrabassoon is so low, I can't do it on this little keyboard on that piano over there. The contrabassoon can hit the second to lowest note on the piano. It's a really big, the double bassoon we looked at earlier in the semester. He added more trombones. He also made higher notes by adding piccolos, which went an octave higher than a flute. So flute is a high instrument, right? And the piccolo is a little one. We listened to Stars and Stripes Forever. The really high notes. He started adding these into his orchestra around this time. All right, and then he had more of this personal feeling in his music rather than just organizing sound. So let's listen to a little bit of Beethoven's Ninth. A little thing about it, again, written near the end of his life, last few years of his life, and he was almost completely deaf, and they call it the choral symphony. So a symphony, we've talked about the 4 movements for an orchestra. This has a choir involved and soloists. It's a lot of people. And it has Ode to Joy. If you guys know Ode to Joy, really simple tune. You might have played it in recorder class in 3rd grade or something, or beginner piano. But it's so powerful, and if you hear it in this context and read along with the lyrics, it's very strong, very powerful, for lack of a better word. All right. So I'm gonna play a little bit at the beginning to see how he builds tension, and then we'll jump ahead and listen to how he adds singing to this. Okay, and you can hear how the singing works. So just listen to the very beginning of this and how he creates tension, and then 7:28. Okay. Yeah, see, this movement's half an hour long. It's just one movement. Building it up, you want something to happen. You feel this tension. Okay, so let's just jump ahead. Recognize the conductor. I forgot his name. Hold on. What's the conductor's name? Hey, I can't do it. Hold on. I forget. That's the guy from the Haydn Symphony. The guy was being funny. Daniel Barenboim. Barenboim. I knew that. Is he still around? Yeah, he's only 77. Argentina. Only 77. All right. So anyway, check out the part when now we have singing put in here. And again, I don't expect you guys to know German, so follow along with the subtitles and hear how uplifting the message is and how powerful this is written. Imagine going to this performance. This deaf guy wrote this piece, and you're hearing this brand new piece by someone that can never hear it. Okay. So I don't think most people, when you're learning this in elementary school recorder class, you even learn about what it's about and where this came from, right? You might learn, oh, Beethoven wrote this piece. But the melody is not the important part here. I think the simplicity in the melody is what makes it so powerful. And you hear, if you were deaf and you were a composer, would you write something so joyful and so triumphant. That's what I think is so amazing about this. So he had a positive attitude about it. He didn't originally, by the time he writes this piece. Now, this is kind of a song. This is a symphony. It's still a symphony. This is not opera. You can call this a song. You can call Ode to Joy a song because there's lyrics written for a singer. But it's a choral piece from the end of a symphony, from the fourth movement. And like I said, the whole symphony is about 74 minutes long, with the last movement half an hour. But it just keeps changing and evolving, and you hear all these connections throughout the whole thing. That is worth, put on the whole thing sometime. Do this. Now that you guys have more time, probably, not commuting to school or less work to do, better yourself. Some people are like learning languages or, doing yoga, all that kind of stuff. Spend some time. I would sit with this. Or watch it. Watch this video. These are all on YouTube. And I think it's like character building if you sit and listen to all of it and you learn to love it, or at least appreciate it, understand how this is made. So if there's any questions about, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, the Viennese school, and why they're important. But I want to talk about the next assignment we're going to do. Because that's standard syllabus material here. So there's no quiz thingy for today. Instead, there's the assignment due Monday. Okay, so if there's any questions, let me know. Let's get to assignment number 3. Let me explain this to make sure no one gets confused. And I've been hinting at this for the past few weeks. So what I want you to do in a couple paragraphs, not long, up to 500 words at most. Don't get too in depth. You're going to discuss the role of technology. Technology. I can't read my own writing. Discuss the role technology has played in the sound of early classical music, meaning medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, and classical. I don't want papers about the CD player and about the DJ equipment. I've had way too many of those. It's like, please read. All right, medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, and classical. So we're talking about the technology at the time. So things to consider. This is pretty much the answers for you. Wind instruments. Remember we looked at the early wind instruments in the medieval and the Renaissance period. And they had fewer keys. They can only play certain notes. Think about how that influenced the way music sounded. Would wind instruments add those colors to the pieces? Keyboards. We looked at today. For release, a lot of you were saying, wow, this is a beautiful piece. Why is that a beautiful piece of music? The piano allowed you to be more expressive. Okay? Stringed instruments. The old ones were very quiet. And they were hard to tune. So you couldn't have these big orchestras. They couldn't play in tune with each other. So as technology improved and we were able to make better instruments, we were able to make better music. There's other stuff we can talk about too. This is just some things to consider. You can talk about the printing press and what that did. You can talk about the idea of the music industry and the fact that amateur musicians can buy music now and practice it at home. So, discuss how they affected composition, and did these improvements in technology affect how classical music sounded? See how it's big C classical? Oh, where's my point? No, my pointer doesn't work because I have XSplit set. No, does it work? Hold on. Oh, it does work. All right, good. There's a delay. We're good. So big C classical versus little c classical. Early little c means these things. All right, maybe one day someone will change this name so it doesn't confuse people so much. Right? So this big C classical, like how did the sound of the stuff we listened to today, how was it affected by technology? And like I just said, I just gave you the answer. A lot of it's instruments. It could be the printing press to be able to print music for lots of people, allowing for a bigger orchestra. The advent of new instruments, right? We talked about contrabassoon and piccolo. We have new ideas. Again, don't talk about technology today. It's technology from, hundreds of years ago. That's what technology doesn't mean. Computers and all this stuff we're doing here with my webcam and my fancy microphone, and that is technology, but that's not the only thing it means. I think I've gotten too many papers that didn't really make any sense in the past. Due Monday, okay. Let me check my syllabus. It should be on the syllabus. I painstakingly went through it and made it all organized. Yeah, April. That's already April. I forgot about that. April Fool's Day. Totally forgot. Sorry. Anyway, so the Canvas quiz, they're already up. The first 3 are up. If you haven't done them, please do them as soon as you can. And then get this in by Monday, and then we'll resume next week with the Romantic era if no one has any questions. All right. So again, I'll put these up on YouTube. I edited the first few. I don't think anyone saw them. I only got a few things. Need citation. That's a good question. You don't need formal citations in this unless you do pull something from something we haven't discussed. Like basically, if you write what we talked about in class, and that's fine. But if you find some article about an instrument we didn't talk about, like a cittern or something, and you start talking about it and say like this and this, then you should cittern. I said it right. And I don't even know what that is. Yes, from the Renaissance. Okay, but basically just write clearly. Don't answer it like it's a tweet. Most of you are good with this. I've had some classes when people didn't understand like how to you have to write in paragraphs and make it look neat. But this is the penultimate assignment. The next one is in a few more weeks. It's a response paper on something we do in class, and then everything else is those little quizzes, and then there will be the final. So we're only about halfway done with the semester, even though it feels forever because of this whole pandemic. Yes, definitely talk about the viola da gamba. That's a great thing to talk about. So don't spend the whole time on it. It's good to talk about other instruments, but the viola da gamba is a great topic, just because it's kind of extinct, right? But I shouldn't say extinct. It's just not used in big orchestras. It's only used by groups that play Renaissance music, except for I played it I still do sometimes play in a prog rock band, and when I had my viola da gamba, I recorded parts for it for an album. So it was like this rock music with a viola da gamba. Why not? But yeah, definitely good topic. So yeah, let me know if you have any other questions, and if not, take care. Be sure to stay safe. Like I said, stay home, please. It's like I hear these stories of people going out, and you never know who's gonna get this thing, and it's supposed to get worse. So I haven't left my house in over a week, and luckily I have food delivered. Yeah, yes, balak. I don't know how to say that word, but is that Romanian? It's Russian. Okay, it's Russian. Yeah, I remember seeing those. I saw one of those in Germany. Actually at Beethoven's house. I went to Beethoven's house. His house is a museum now. Yeah, Russian. So yeah. And at Beethoven's house in Bonn, it's a museum, and you can see his old instruments. It's really cool. And his garden where he worked, and the pianos he played on. And there was a bunch of street musicians, and someone played that. I'm like, what's that big triangle guitar? Cool, awesome. Yeah, you can write about that, but like, was it used in? Was it used in the music? It was used in It's more of a folk instrument, isn't it? I'm pretty sure that the balalaika. I don't know if I Russian. I don't know Russian very well. That was used a lot in folk music, and so think about think about how instruments like the hurdy-gurdy is a good one to write about. Like no one ever hears a hurdy-gurdy today. I should say no one. I hate those statements, but like that's not as common. Or harpsichord, right? Good pronunciation, good. Yeah, I don't know my Russian, but we'll do a lot of Russian music next week. I think we have some Russian composers, but yeah, try not to get confused with like folk instruments. But some instruments, again, they've evolved, but they're not relevant. Like guitars have evolved a lot, but they're not as relevant in this music. So think about the expansion of the orchestra. I think is really important. And then today, technology is always important, right? We talk about how computers and stuff influence music, but that's not what this is about. That would be cool for another class. In a music technology class, we talk about this a lot. But all right. So if you have no other questions, have a good day. Have a good weekend. Sometimes it's hard to remember what day it is, but have a good weekend. Get these things in, and again, the Canvas quizzes, they grade themselves. Sometimes I have to go through. Some people have mentioned like I have to go and like spell some things wrong or something to let you get credit, because it's really not fair if you spell something wrong, you don't get points. But please try to spell it right. All right, have a good day. I'll see you guys next week, Monday, same time, same place.